the God in the bad times, the God of the day. He's still the God of the night. We talk of faith when up on that mountain. This little love mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, oh, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All around my neighbor's door, I'm gonna let it shine. All around I dreamed of a city called glory, so bright and so fair. As I entered the gates, I cried, oh, the angels all met me there. They carried me from mansion to mansion, and all the songs I sang. Then I said, I want to see Jesus, 'cause he's the one who died for me. Oh, I bowed on my knees and cried, holy. I cried, holy. You are holy. Oh, I clapped my hands and sang glory. I sang glory to the Son of God. Well, I sang glory to the Son of God. And as I entered the gates of that city, all my loved ones, they all knew me well. And as we walked down the streets of heaven, all the scenes too many to tell. I saw Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I talked with Mark, with Luke, and Timothy. And I said, Timothy, I want to see Jesus, 'cause he's the one who died for all. I bowed on my knees and cried, holy. I cried, holy. You are holy. Oh, I clapped my hands and sang glory. I sang glory. Oh, glory, glory. I clapped my hands and sang glory. I clapped my hands and sang glory. I clapped my hands and sang glory. I sing glory to the Son of God. Well, I sing glory to the Son of God.
have a pretty good feeling that if Daddy Buck had been here, he would have clapped and went, because he is here in our midst, in the faces of all of you that I see. One of the wonderful things that I loved about Daddy Buck was when he prayed. So let's pray. Dear Lord, we come to you today to honor our daddy, our granddaddy, our Daddy Buck, our brother, our uncle, our cousin, our pastor, our friend, our hero. We are gathered here today not only to grieve the loss of Daddy Buck, but to also give thanks to you for his life among us. I count it all joy to have been as one of his circle. Lord, last night, as we sat around our house, loved ones gathered round, I could not have been more humbled that you saw fit in your great plan of my steps that you have counted to have walked into this family. How humbled I am to have been able to sit at a table with Buck Ward. How thankful I am to have been able to sit in his living room time and time and time again and had him bring me comfort. And had him tell me stories. And had him love me as if I was always his. I know that's how he made so many people feel, because you endowed him with such magnificent love, amazing love, because he was completely in love with you. We are gathered here today not only to mourn over how different our lives will be without him, but to give thanks for how full life was when he was with us. You placed in him a great gift of love for fellow man that he shared freely, and we are thankful for that love. You have gathered here today, loved ones and friends and people around the country on Facebook. You've gathered here today to give thanks to you, Father God, for the gift of long life and the gift of family and the gift of friendships. All of these Daddy Buck treasured. And I praise and I thank you for this family, for these friends who gather together in this place and those who are away from us. Lord, we ask that you would comfort us this day as we come together to share love and sweet memories with one another. Lord, in all things, may you be high and lifted up in this place. And set your grace and peace upon us for Christ's sake. Amen.
In Christ alone, my hope is found. He is my light, my strength, my song. This cornerstone, this
want to thank all of you for coming today. You just being here, I thank you for you coming to pay a tribute to my father, to our father. Last night I heard many amazing stories about how this little man touched so many lives in our community, in different churches we've served. So I thank you for coming. In the past few years, on several occasions, I asked my father, Daddy, what do you want for your funeral? Well, I want to be buried by your mother, and I want a flag on my casket. Okay, what else? I don't care. Okay, well, who do you want to preach your funeral? I don't want a preacher. I said, okay, so what am I supposed to do? He says, whatever you want to do will be just fine. And so that kind of put me in a dilemma. And so I even named off all kinds of different preachers that we knew, and he said, I don't want a preacher. So I said, okay. So one night I went to sleep, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I said, I know who's going to be his special speaker. And so I went to Daddy, and I crawled up right in his face, and I said, okay, Daddy, you haven't told me who you want to speak for your funeral. I found a speaker for your funeral. And he said, who is it? So I told him, and his response is he just grinned real big. And so I would like to introduce you to our special speaker, who is also my very favorite preacher of all time.
Sometime after Christmas, I got another surprise gift. Sherry said, I want you to preach your own funeral. And because nobody knows you better than you know yourself. But I can't tell everything I know about myself, because people are supposed to say, oh, what a nice fella he was. And most of the time I tried to be nice. First funeral I had was for the Bantam Hen. Margaret and Sister Ellen and Sister Barbara were the congregation. And Barbara cried because she had Bantam hens for breakfast, and now the Bantam was dead. And Ellen was making a funeral out of that because she was practicing for something. And we had a big sawdust fire close to the house, and whenever anything died, we buried them in the sawdust pile. So we had the funeral right in front of the sawdust pile. And so when the Bantam Hen died, she decided she would have a funeral for us. And she would bury the Bantam Hen, one of my toys, and her doll with the starry eyes. She had me do the talking. So I made the funeral speech for the Bantam Hen. And the Bantam Hen stayed dead, and Barbara cried. And I had the funeral home for my toy dog. And when Ellen buried him, I got his ear sticking out so he could say what I said about him. But that was my first funeral, and had a resurrection of the dog come out because I saw his ear and pulled him out of the sawdust. I grew up in the wilderness, 40 miles to town, 20 miles to a post office, and 13 miles to a telephone. That was pretty much wilderness. And when we went to town, we had to line up, and they told us to be quiet and not say anything or people would find out we were dumb. So we didn't talk, and then people would say, what's the matter with that little kid? Is he dumb? And I said, Mama, they found out anyhow. Mother was the first one to baptize me. Victor Conrad with me for the last week of school. And I was showing out a little bit. Mother was at the sink washing potatoes. I walked over there and put my hands in the water with the potatoes that she'd already peeled. And she told me to get out of that because they were clean potatoes. And I looked over at Vicky, and he kind of smiled at me, showed his teeth a little bit. So I thought I'd show off. I walked back over and I put my hands in there again. And that time, Mother picked me up, and she dunked me head first in a gallon of water. I rose out of there just almost ready to cry, but holding back because Vicky was there. And when he looked at me, I said something to him I shouldn't have, and Mother picked me up and ducked me in the other tub. So I was baptized twice there, and the preacher came up from town spoke to Jack or something with Jack, and when he left, he told Mother that when we were big enough, we'd come to town, go to his church, and he would baptize us like he had Brother Jack. So when he left, I walked up to the Spring Creek, and I thought I would baptize myself. And I dipped my head in the water, said, I baptize me in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Because that time we still had a Holy Ghost. And I looked around in the trees and the wind was blowing, and I could see the ghost shaving the top of the tree. And so that was maybe the second time I was baptized. I did it myself. And I guess it took. My brother Jack he came down sick, and they took him to the doctors in Big Timber. The doctors in Big Timber said he had to go to Billings or someplace, and they decided they would keep him at home and do the best they could. And he slowly got worse and worse all the time. About that time, Daddy picked up Jimmy Hicks down by the Melville where he was hitchhiking. Jimmy's mother had kicked him out because she didn't have enough money and enough food to feed the rest of the children. She said he had to go out on his own. He came around Melville looking for a job. Father said, we don't have a job, but we got some work. And he carried him up there. And so Jimmy Hicks took his one shirt and moved over to the bunkhouse. He was there, and sometimes he would come over. He would come over, of course, eat in the house all the time. Sometimes you'd hear him in the back room talking with Jack, and the two of them would be laughing together. And that was kind of nice. One evening in about October, and Barbara met us at the yard door, and she said, Jack has died. And we went in the house, and the house was quiet and still, but the middle room where his bed was now vacant. And so a couple of days later, we went down for his funeral. And his funeral was, it was real sad, but I was 6 years old and too old to cry. So I sat there, and after the funeral, I said I didn't cry. I said, but I almost cried when I saw Jack laying there in that casket the last time. And then Ernest, my father's partner, he bursted out crying right then. That set him off. I looked up beside my daddy, and Jimmy Hicks was standing beside him and had his hand on his shoulder. And then Jimmy looked like a man. The meeting and courting of Jean. Well, you got to do some preparation to get a good grandmother for kids that have be coming along or might not be coming. I was last year of high school, and here the valedictorian was a girl named Jean Knapp. And I said, oh gosh, she probably knows how to milk cows and ride a horse. I went to see Barbara, but I wanted to see that girl that had graduated in high school. Heard she was there. So I went in, and I was showing out with Jean and her sister Betty, and I drank 6 glasses of water. I drank that water and showed out. And this Miss Jean sat down at the piano. She really played up quite a song. Found out later it was a player piano, but anyhow, the water wasn't player water, it was real water. The 10th day of September, 1943, I had just turned 18 years old. I was old enough to get into the Army, and I went with about 10 of us went up to Butte and swore into the Army. And we were the first big outfit to go from the stateside of the United States to Europe. The German artillery, most of it you could hear coming, and then when the shells screamed, why you'd duck down. But they had some 88s that fired faster than the speed of sound, and you couldn't hear them. They just blow up when they got there. About halfway down across the field, why, they called up 8 tanks to come up and support us so we could run on in with the tanks firing over our head. But getting those tanks up there was, with the infantry, it was like kicking over a beehive to keep the bees from stinging. The stings were those 88 shells, and the artillery dropping in on us and dropping in on the tanks. They knocked 6 of the tanks out in about 15 minutes, and the other 2 went back over the hill and fired over the hill pretty well below where anybody could hit us with a machine gun or a rifle. But we had our orders that December 2nd we were to go out and take Flossdorf. So we got up in the dark and assembled and started off after Lieutenant Lovell across the field. We got pretty close to Flossdorf. You could see the buildings in it up close to us. And daylight coming, artillery shell or a mortar shell dropped in right close to us. Kabang! And I felt something hit me in the back of the ribs. Lieutenant Lovell was closer to where the explosion was, and he was laying on the ground. I crawled over to him, and I put a bandage on his stub of his leg, and his boot was laying about 10 yards from us, and his foot was in the boot. And I helped him into the hole left by the artillery shell. And he said, "Little one, we're not going to make it. I'm not going to make it." I says, "Yes, you are, Lieutenant. They'll send you back to the States for this." He says, "No, I'm not going to make it." And I laid him in the shell hole. And I said, "I'm going after some help for you." And I crawled across the field, seeing if I could find some help for the Lieutenant Lovell. Got part way across the field, and I heard somebody holler, "Help! Help!" And I crawled over there to a fellow that was talking. His name was Hallish. I took Hallish's belt off, and I put it around his thigh. He'd been machine gunned just above his knee. I put it around his thigh and stops the blood from flowing so fast, and got him scooped down in the below ground. And then I crawled on toward the front, and I heard somebody holler at me over here, and I crawled over there. And there was a fellow from F Company, he was a California kid, and I called, he was in the foxhole, machine gun hole that they just taken it from the Germans. I called over there, and he put a bandage on the back of my ribs where I had some shell fragments and artillery shells dropped a smoke bomb on us. Smoke bombs around in front of us and beside us, and then we heard tanks rattling through the smoke bomb. We kind of worried, well, were they German tanks or our tanks? Then when the smoke cleared off, why, here was our first lieutenant of the company was there with the major, and they were hooked up to the tank with radio telephones and directing the battle ahead. And there was more shooting around town, and then the shooting stopped, and we looked up and we saw 25 or 30 prisoners, Germans, coming out with their arms behind their head. They come out to be our prisoners. I helped escort them back wasn't much help. I helped her escort them back toward the rear to the prison compound. And that's when I got given a ride on to the hospital. In about a week, why, I was walking, able to walk around and get to the latrine. And I was going on there walking that way, and the red-headed nurse saw me. And she hollered at me. She said, "Soldier, when you're walking here, you stand up and walk like a man." So I kind of straightened up and I walked better. It was either that day or the next day that the boy on the cot, about 3 beds away from me, he just passed out. And the fellow next to him said, "He's dead." That red-headed nurse came with what she had, and she worked him over and pulled him out. And after that, a lot of us walked a lot straighter. I got home from the Army and got home. I got a book with adventures of our unit. Leo Hallish was name wasn't with the list of people that had lost their life. So I always wondered what happened to him. A year ago, we got a letter in the mail from his youngest son and said I'd saved his father's life. And then he got married, and they had 6 daughters and 1 son. He said I'd saved his father's life, and he really thanked me for it. So someplace there's Michigan around there. There's 6 girls and 1 boy that are around because I bound up their father's leg and got him where he could lay there till they picked him up and carried him off the battlefield. When I come out of the Army, why, the first thing I did was go down and started courting Jean, and we were married in July of that year. It was a big church. Barbara and Betty and Ralph Sherrod witnessed that we got married there. Then I looked up and we finished up, and here on the balcony, the preacher had 6 red-headed kids lined up there approving our wedding. That was a sign of things to come. And lo and behold, Jean's tummy began to rise up. Doctor said we were going to have a baby. When the baby was born, took Jean down to, we took her down to Big Timber and left her at Grandma Knapp's house at the edge of the yard so she would be a lot closer to Susie Moggelson's house. Susie Moggelson was the midwife in Big Timber at that time. And she had a house up on the highway going into town. You can go by there now and you can see a car wash. And you see that post right at the edge of the car wash. The town side of it, that's about where the maternity ward was. We telling Lynn, and that was put up in honor of her. And so I come home, I went out to Grandma and Daddy B's house and told them they had a new grandbaby. Went up to Melville that night and celebrated, passed out cigars to all my friends and all the people that were suddenly taking up the smoking habit. Then I went, when Lynn was about a week old, we carried her home back up to the cabin. That was the first child that came. For the next one came along the next fall. And the doctor thought he came a little early, and he might have been 3 weeks early, but not as early as the doctor predicted. We named him David Robert. David was the name we picked out for him especially, but Robert was my name and my father's name. First grandson that Daddy had, and the first boy baby that had been born west of the Basin Creek Schoolhouse. So he had his part of flame then, and after that the people down between us and the Basin Creek Schoolhouse decided they could have boys and girls both. But until David came along, they hadn't had a boy baby born. That next winter, Jean was pregnant again. And it was winter time and pretty tough winter. Quite a bit of snow on the ground. We took Jean down to live with her grandma and that. Went home and worked about a week and cleared the road out of snow. And as soon as we got the road cleared out of snow, we come up a blizzard and started blowing snow in. And it filled all the graded out roads full of big drifts. Middle of the night, while Lloyd Ryan came up and he said, "Bucky, he's just got a baby in town." And so I started down and stopped at Ryan's and had a cup of coffee. And then at daylight I went and started on. And I shoveled snow drifts, took down fences and run across the fields where the snow wasn't drifted deep. And I got into Big Timber along about 4:30, 5 o'clock. Gene and I picked out the name Gary, but we named him John after my deceased brother and some of Father's family that carried the name John with off and on. Then B came along. He was named after Daddy B. Knapp, and he got his middle name Carrington from his grandfather Ward. My brother Jack that died, his name was John Carrington, and my father's name was John Carrington, and my grandfather's name was Walter Carrington, so we had B. Carrington. So we had a pretty good family and went home and well satisfied with ourselves. Lo and behold, Jane was pregnant again. She wasn't going to be delivered until toward the end of May, and when the road would be good. The county had started working down on the bridges in the Sweetgrass River, and they tore the bridge out at the Ryan place to replace it with another. But when Margaret came, and she didn't come in the early morning when we could drive across the bridge. The river, we came at night and we had to go down there where the river was high and there were logs and brush floating down the river. But Lloyd Ryan met us down by the crossing and hauled us across the river. And Jean said, "Drive faster." Not drive faster and it'd be rough on her. And she'd have a panic. She'd say, slow down. So sometimes I would drive faster and sometimes I would slow down. So we went on to the village of Melville, and just the other side of that we saw a light off in the Melville flat, and we drove over there. And her daughter, Pearl Miller, was there. And Pearl Miller was a nurse that worked in Big Timber. He just got in the house there, and Jean got as far as the sofa and parted company with Margaret. So Pearl picked Margaret up, wrapped her in a pillowcase, and rode on to Big Timber with us. And I checked Pearl and Margaret both in the hospital place they had then. We named Margaret after Margaret Knapp, one grandmother, and Anita Ward, another grandmother. And so she was well named, and after Margaret was born, we packed up and moved to Georgia. But of course we didn't have to worry about it because I'd gone to the doctor's office and he said he could fix me up so we wouldn't have any more children. But his fixing up didn't fix me. Lo and behold, I found out we were going to have another baby. That time we had dry roads, no snow, no bridges out. Just went over to Griffin, Georgia, and Sherry was born about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. We named her Sherry for a name that Jean and I liked. Well, we named her Jean after my wife's middle name. So we were in Georgia with a full family then. What a joy it was to go someplace with all those little kids chasing me. I enjoyed them very, very much. When Sherry got to be a year old, why, she would ride on the back of my neck, and we'd ride around there in Laverne's old house. Really enjoyed those children. And that was just the start. The children grew up, and performed some weddings for some of them. And they started treating us with grandchildren. They didn't stop having grandchildren. One time I sat down laying in bed, I think I named 20 names there for grandchildren. And then the grandchildren had some great-grands. Ooh, that was one of the great joys of my life, were those children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. So who knows, they'll give us a prize for having lots of children. I sure appreciated those little kids, and I liked what grandkids was around. I'm encouraging them to get educated. I'm challenging them to go and keep it going and try that which they felt called to do, but they felt was impossible. They're a smart bunch of kids, smart bunch of people. Probably the biggest change in my life has been the call to the ministry. This happened to me about 1950. My wife got me a Bible for Christmas. Not long after, Ruth Ryan got pregnant, and she asked me to fill her place as a Sunday school teacher. So I went down to the Melville Lutheran Church, oldest Lutheran rural church in Montana, and I became a Sunday school teacher. And it worked out pretty good. And from there I felt a call to the ministry. Being called to the ministry in the church put me all across the different parts of the United States than I'd been in before. I finished my high school in Big Timber, Montana, and found out that to get into the ministry I should have needed some college work. I wrote to various places about schools, New York City, and I wrote to University of Georgia because Gene's folks had just moved there. University of Georgia wrote back and said that Georgia had a part of the university in Atlanta that was a night school, and you could go there and still get a job and work and support your family, because I had to keep my family supported and at the same time go to school. So I went to school for 4.5 years in Atlanta, and I graduated. Next year I applied for admission to the theology school at Emory University. I started school in a log cabin in Montana where we had a high attendance of 6 people, and most of the time it was 3 and 4 in the schoolhouse. I graduated and got a diploma from Emory University with, must have been 3,000 or 4,000 people standing there, waiting there to get their graduation. Then I had another change there, and I got assigned to a church in Georgia. Soon I was traveling across different areas of Georgia, and eventually, because of my call to the ministry, I traveled around Georgia as much as I'd traveled around France and Europe in World War II, and it wasn't quite as dangerous. But it was still enlightening. I remember different charges and different people I'd served as a minister. Some of them were very unique, and some of them were very smart. A lot of them were a lot better than I was, but I was there as a minister, and I tried to walk and treat them like I was one of them, and I think I did pretty well in that. The other time I went to the hospital, and I had done a miracle cure on the old grandmother. The grandmother was laying in bed. They thought she was dying, and I went in there and had a prayer with her. And right after my prayer, the morning I stopped in early. First thing was because I thought she might be dead. Wanted to check with the family right quick. And I got up there and walked down the hall, and they said, "Here's the preacher now." And I come there and they hollered and said, you cured Mama. said right after you left, when he had that prayer weather on left, she raised up in bed and said, "Where's my snuff?" I had other experiences with lots of people, and I found out those people were good. Some of them did some bad things, but they were most of them good people. And some of the best people in the community were in the hospital, and some of them were in my church. The people in the places have been very rewarding and very nice to get here. And I had a challenge sometimes, but most of the time it was very, very happy challenge. It didn't anybody chase me away. That I know of. And all in all, it's been a lot of fun. Nice to serve the church. Nice to serve people. And sometimes I would come home with some pretty good stories to tell Jean. But Jean kept quiet. She didn't tell other people about it, I don't think. What a joy it is. And what a joy that my family's been to me. And I hope you like them too.
You've heard it said that we preach our own funeral with the life we live. I don't know anyone who could stand here today and preach Daddy's funeral any better than what he has already preached and lived before us. He walked a living testimony of his salvation. I've heard many say that they could see Christ in him in everything he did. A friend put it this way: the kindest gift a loved one can leave behind is the knowledge that their salvation and confidence is in Jesus Christ. Buck's heart was settled, and that it was. I want to close with this story. The elderly man stopped at the door of the classroom, Miss Spiegel's classroom, in fact. Though the man was small of stature, his presence demanded attention and respect. He stretched to his full frame of just over 5 feet. His World War II Army jacket was held closed by the bottom button. He tucked his cane under his arm and marched into the room. As he stopped in front of the room, he turned to face the students. "Before I was born," were his first words. Isn't that where all of our stories begin? As with most of his stories, they took him back to the mountains of Montana. Well, they should, because he is the man of the mountains. Before he was born, a family in Melville bought old retired cavalry horses for the kids to ride. One day the kids were out riding when some soldiers rode by on their mounts. One of the riders sounded his bugle. The cavalry horses the kids were riding answered the call. Off their horses ran to join the others. Horses were soldiers too, you know. They went quite a distance before the horses turned for home. As the man of the mountains told his story, he said, "Old soldiers answered the call of the bugle, and I answered the call." Well, this little man of the mountains answered another bugle call. On Friday, he told Lynn, "Karis and I have a birthday party to go to tomorrow." He lived up to his promise. Saturday afternoon, April 21st, 2018, as the party was set up outside his window, God granted his prayer. His commander-in-chief sounded the bugle calling Robert Brannon Buckward home. The old soldier answered the call. And one day, I'm going to meet him on the mountain.
trouble